World tour. The president is embarking on his first foreign trip since taking office, including a stop at the Vatican to meet with the Pope. Healthcare reform. Why the GOP plan to repeal and replace Obamacare has yet to reach the Senate. Guilty plea. Former Congressman Anthony Weiner appears in court after a probe into his lewd messages to a teenager. And marching for life in Italy.
When it began, it was just a few thousand people, and now it's over 40,000 people.
We talked to one pro-lifer who's in Rome for the 7th annual event. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, May 19, 2017. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump concludes a controversial week at home by leaving the country, embarking on the first overseas trip of his administration. One of the goals, encourage peace between people of Muslim, Jewish, and Christian faiths. President Trump begins an ambitious 9-day tour today.
The president prioritizes building strong relationships.
National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster outlining Trump's goal for the first foreign trip of his presidency. Trump will hopscotch from Saudi Arabia to Israel to the Vatican. He'll close his trip with a pair of summits in Brussels and Sicily. In Saudi Arabia, the president will meet with the leaders of dozens of Arab states and deliver an address to the Islamic world. For Catholics, the highlight will be his audience with the Holy Father Wednesday morning.
In Rome, I will talk with Pope Francis about the contributions of Christian teachings to the world.
The White House says the president wants to focus on what unites people of different faiths and to deliver a message of tolerance and hope.
No president has ever visited the homelands and holy sites of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths all on one trip.
President Trump will take a tour of St. Peter's Basilica and Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Sepulchre, as well as the iconic Western Wall. The last legs of the trip are NATO in Brussels and the G7 summit in Sicily. Trump has repeatedly mentioned abandoning NATO, but he recently reassured American allies that he remains committed to the pact.
I'll work closely with all of our NATO allies to enhance this partnership and to adapt to the challenges of the future, of which there will be many.
Each stop comes with high stakes, and the world will be watching to see how President Trump fares. Ivanka Trump and First Lady Melania Trump will join the president on his trip. Ivanka serves as a senior advisor to her father. She'll be present for 6 out of the 9 days and will hold some of her own meetings. Both Melania and Ivanka Trump will join the president when he meets Pope Francis. As the leader of the free world meets the leader of the church, we ask Catholic lawmakers what they hope the Pope and the president will talk about.
Finding areas of mutual concern. One of those that I hope and perhaps expect is the persecution of Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East. As you know, our government has declared genocide. We've led on this internationally. We've raised international conscience.
Hopefully the president comes out of this with a good understanding of the role that the Vatican plays in the world.
You know, President Trump is doing a tremendous amount of work on behalf of the culture of life, particularly as it relates to protecting unborn children in our international foreign aid, as well as domestically. And I think that should not go unnoticed by the Vatican.
Pope Francis says he will listen respectfully to what President Trump has to say when the two meet. He says he never makes a judgment about a person without hearing him out. Join us now is Alfonso Aguilar, president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles and former chief of the U.S. Office of Citizenship. Alfonso, you're a faithful Catholic. How significant is it that for Catholics that President Trump is meeting with the Pope on his first international trip?
I think it's extremely important. You know, in the past, presidents in their first trip had usually visited Canada, or in the case of President Bush, Mexico. The fact that he's going to countries with important religious sites, to the main religions, I think it's very important. The fact that he's going directly to Rome, I think shows that he recognizes the spiritual and moral leadership of Pope Francis. So I think for us Catholics, I think it's just very important. And I think it highlights also the importance that the Trump administration is giving to religious freedom and to the importance of faith in society.
Last year, Pope Francis said, I want to quote here, he says, "A person who only thinks about building walls is not a Christian." Now, some people feel that comment had to do with Donald Trump's proposal to build a wall. Did you interpret that way? And what do you think about this meeting? Do you think they'll talk about that?
Not really. I mean, I think he was asked a general question. Obviously, there's probably displeasure with the way Donald Trump talks about immigration when he talks about, building the wall, that Mexico's going to pay for it, that the majority of people coming from the southern border are criminals and rapists. I'm sure the Pope is not very happy with that tone, but I think as they talk about immigration, I think the Vatican and the Pope will be very pleased with a lot of the proposals that Mr. Trump is putting forward in terms of immigration. He's saying, we have to take care of border security. We have to remove those who undocumented immigrants who have criminal records, but those who are good people, we have to make a decision. And he's called the majority of undocumented people terrific people. He's also said about the Dreamers, those who came here illegally when they were minors, that he wants to find a solution for them. So I think the problem, that the issue the Vatican has had, Pope Francis, is mostly with tone rather than policy. So I think it's going to be a constructive discussion.
Well, as you know, Alfonso, in terms of the domestic mainstream media, that's not been the focus in terms of Donald Trump. It's been a lot of negative in terms of how they present the way the Pope and Trump sort of disagree on the subject, like immigration. But in fact, there seems to be a lot of areas that you had alluded to before where they actually agree, especially on the pro-life efforts. Do you think a lot of these issues will help them to sort of unite as opposed to divide?
Absolutely. But President Trump has shown that he's committed to defending the dignity of the human person, and that's certainly an important point of agreement. But there's another point that the media has paid absolutely no attention to. Donald Trump has said that the United States should not export values that go against the values of different cultures across the world, that we should respect the sovereignty of foreign countries, and he said that he wants to reduce foreign aid, probably in programs through the U.S. Agency for International Development that promote abortion or the radical LGBT agenda. And the Pope has been critical of those efforts from the Obama administration, calling them colonial imperialism. So it seems to me that there's going to be a lot of agreement in that area in ensuring that the United States does not export proactively, like President Obama did, abortion and an LGBT agenda, generally a very culturally leftist agenda, and respect the sovereignty of other countries.
Okay, well, we'll be watching for sure. Alfonso Aguilar, president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
The White House invited our own Lauren Ashburn and other network anchors to join the president for lunch yesterday to get a preview of his overseas trip. EWTN News Nightly will also bring you comprehensive coverage of the president's meeting with Pope Francis. Our executive producer, Susie Pinto, will report from Rome. Join us all next week. 2 weeks after the House approved a bill to replace Obamacare and defund Planned Parenthood, it still hasn't been sent to the Senate. Bloomberg News says lawmakers in the House may have to re-vote on the measure. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi explains the plot twist. Jason?
White House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy confirmed to me that they are indeed holding the bill as they wait for a report on its impact. The Congressional Budget Office expects to put out its estimates on Wednesday, and that all-important report will determine if the bill satisfies arcane Senate rules. If not, the House would need to redo their health care bill. Democrats say the delay is very unusual.
Off and on, I've been here in the Hill for several decades. I don't ever remember a situation like this. Maybe it has happened, but I sure don't recall it.
On May 4th, the House passed the Republican health care bill with only a few votes to spare. Republicans traveled to the White House to celebrate with President Trump, but Bloomberg's Billy House first reported the unusual news. The bill hasn't even been sent to the Senate yet.
Once you send it over there, the House cannot take it back. So if they send a faulty bill over there, and in other words, it does not meet the requirements of the reconciliation instructions expressed earlier by the Budget Committee, it's dead unless they fix it. Everybody's on pins and needles here.
Speaker Paul Ryan said on the radio today he doesn't think the House will need to vote again on the bill. He says it's a non-issue, but he says out of an abundance of caution, they're still holding the health care bill until the Congressional Budget Office estimates come next week. Wyatt?
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting from Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. Our partners at the National Catholic Register have more on the healthcare overhaul, including reaction from U.S. bishops. You can read more now at ncregister.com. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein tells members of Congress he stands by a memo he wrote before the firing of FBI Director James Comey. Rosenstein met with lawmakers in closed-door meetings yesterday and today.
The briefing was very good, and what I learned, and I'm very satisfied with, is that the special prosecutor will have the breadth of scope necessary to follow any and all leads.
Rosenstein said he wrote a memo after the president told him Comey would be fired and said he had no intention of it being used as justification for the firing. Former Democratic Representative Anthony Weiner pleads guilty to sending sexually explicit messages to a teenage girl. Weiner could get years in prison. The FBI began investigating him in September after the girl told a tabloid news site she had exchanged lewd messages with Weiner for several months. The inquiry also led to the discovery of a new batch of emails in the Hillary Clinton investigation, since Weiner's wife was involved in her campaign. Sweden drops its investigation into WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. He has been accused of rape for almost 7 years. Assange took refuge in Ecuador's embassy in London in 2012 to escape extradition. He's still wanted in Britain for jumping bail. Multiple attacks in Afghanistan kill at least 21 people. A roadside bomb killed 11 from the same family as they traveled to a wedding in the eastern part of the country. Also today, 10 police officers were killed in 2 different attacks, 5 during a fight with the Taliban and another 5 when a policeman turned his gun on his colleagues. The Trump administration is imposing sanctions on members of Venezuela's Supreme Court after a series of court rulings sparked a deadly wave of unrest. Protesters have taken to the streets nearly every day since the court stripped Venezuela's Congress of its power. The violence has killed more than 40 people. This marks the second round of sanctions President Trump has imposed on high-level Venezuelan officials since taking office. Iran holds its first presidential election since the country's nuclear deal with world powers. It's largely viewed as a referendum on incumbent Hassan Rouhani. No Iranian president has lost a re-election bid since 1981. Iran extended its voting deadline due to a large turnout. Italy's March for Life takes place tomorrow in Rome. Now its 7th year, the event has become an annual appointment for thousands across Europe. Joseph Meany is the Director of International Outreach and Expansion for Human Life International. He's in Rome now for their March for Life. Joseph, you've attended several of the marches in Italy. How has it grown over the years?
You know, it's expanded over 8 times. When it began, it was just a few thousand people, and now it's over 40,000 people. And it's also drawing people from all over Europe, so it's become quite an international march here.
Well, Italy is a Catholic majority country, of course, and home to the Vatican. Where does Italy stand on pro-life issues?
You know, Italy unfortunately legalized abortion in 1978. So it's been just before John Paul II actually was elected pontiff. So it's been a long haul there, and in Italy they have over 100,000 abortions a year. So it's a major problem here. And on top of that, euthanasia is kind of creeping along. Italy, unfortunately, has a very, very low birth rate. You know, only 1.34 children on average, so even below the very low European averages. And because of that, it's the oldest country in Europe. So it's a kind of a dying society that abortion is just making matters worse.
Well, that's why this March for Life there is so important. You mentioned how it's drawing people from across Europe there to Italy. How is the pro-life movement expanding in Europe, and what efforts are being done for that?
Yeah, you know, with Human Life International, we work all over Europe, all over the world, but we really kind of divide Europe into 2 halves. There's kind of Central and Eastern Europe and then Western Europe. And of course, in Central and Eastern Europe, the pro-lifers are on the offensive. They're doing many, many things, pushing back the laws on abortion. And Poland last year almost passed a law banning every single abortion. They still had 3 exceptions, so rape and incest, life of the mother, etc. But they're on the offensive. In Western Europe, unfortunately, the other side is on the offensive. But again, we get these marches for life. We're actually going to be in a direct link between Birmingham in the UK March for Life, and the Italian March for Life. And so there is hope in Western Europe, but I would say Central and Eastern Europe is where the pro-life gains are being made right now.
Well, Joseph, what kind of support do these marches receive from the church in Europe?
With regards to the churches in Slovakia, where the Bishops' Conference actually organized the march, and every single bishop came for the march. And of course, across Europe, the bishops do come out for the marches, but I think the Slovaks win the prize because the Bishops' Conference actually organized the march themselves, and every last bishop in the country was there. It's beautiful to see how the church supports the movement for life, you know, all over Europe, but the Slovaks are definitely the heroes there.
And it's in general to hear about the marches for life there in Europe are starting to grow. Joseph Meany, Human Life International, thanks so much for talking with us about it.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, a win for pro-lifers. Planned Parenthood is losing its footing. We'll tell you where. And crisis in Sudan, how Christians are helping people in the midst of famine and political turmoil. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. The largest abortion provider in the country announces it will close 4 of its 12 clinics in Iowa. Planned Parenthood blames state funding cuts. The closing will reduce the number of abortion facilities in Iowa from 8 to 5. Earlier this week, Planned Parenthood announced it was closing its only clinic in Wyoming and 3 of its clinics in New Mexico. This week, the niece of civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. opens up to EWTN's Catherine Zeltner about why abortions hurt the black community.
But when I realized that those were little babies, not lumps of flesh, as we were told so many times, then I knew that we were harming not just the babies, not our own bodies, but our communities and our faith.
Alveda King is now pro-life. She's the Director of Civil Rights for the Unborn at Priests for Life. To see more of Catherine's interview, watch EWTN Pro-Life Weekly tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern here on EWTN. You can also catch the show Sunday morning at 10. The president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, will not attend an Islamic summit in Saudi Arabia this weekend in which President Donald Trump is a guest of honor. Bashir is on the International Criminal Court's wanted list for committing crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide in Sudan's Darfur region. It's been the site of violent conflict since 2003, when rebels took up arms against the government, accusing it of discrimination and neglect. The United Nations estimates 300,000 people have died and some 2.7 million have fled their homes. Joining us now is Melinda Heinburger, columnist for the Kansas City Star. Melinda, you spent 2 weeks in the region on a trip sponsored by the Sudan Relief Fund. What's the situation like there?
Well, in Sudan, the people have been under attack from their own government headed by Omar al-Bashir for decades. In South Sudan, the situation is even more acute because they're being systematically starved by their government on really the brink of what a lot of people see as genocide, with many tribal groups fighting the others.
What did the people in Sudan tell you about their president, Bashir?
The part of Sudan that we visited in the Nuba Mountains is such a gorgeous area, and it's a place where Christians and Muslims really get along well, are intermarried, but have been, again, under attack by their government for decades. Bombed, their water poisoned, their crops burned, and now they really are starving and unable to get aid except through the Sudan Relief Fund, because the aid from international groups is cut off, and you really take your life in your hands to go there to deliver humanitarian aid.
When you visited there, were you afraid at all for your own life, your own safety?
I wasn't, but I knew what the situation was. And while we were there were MiGs flying overhead, which really makes people nervous, obviously, because that's usually the precursor to the bombing to start. And there were reports of bombings the day after we left.
Wow. You know, according to the Sudan Relief Fund, 42% of the population in South Sudan is facing famine. That number is expected to increase to 50% by July. What is the Catholic Church doing to try to help people?
The Catholic Church in South Sudan is really one of the only institutions that can be trusted to help, honestly. And there are a lot of groups. The UN does heroic work there. Samaritan's Purse does a lot of great work there. But there's aid being given directly to bishops. There is funding for hospitals, for schools, despite the fact that South Sudan really has almost no infrastructure. It's the youngest country in the world. And, you know, the Holy Father is set to visit there in October. And it's so brave of him to want to bring attention to this situation. But I really wonder, I mean, he will be in danger, and there is very little infrastructure.
Well, I know our EWTN viewers will be praying for the Holy Father during his visit and for that whole region in general. Melinda Heinburger, editorial writer for the Kansas City Star, thanks so much for telling us about your experience.
Thanks for having me, Wyatt.
Up next,
fanatici.
The Holy Father's warning today to the faithful, and school choice, how President Trump's budget proposal could create big changes in education.
Fanatici di cose.
Pope Francis says true dogma unites and ideology divides. During Mass this morning, the Holy Father says in contrast with the apostles who gathered together to discuss problems, there were also fanatics who tried to create problems. Pope Francis says when we are not open to the Holy Spirit, doctrine can become an ideology. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump's 2018 budget is due to be released next week, and school choice is expected to be a big winner. Joining us now is Gerard Robinson, resident fellow in education policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Well, Gerard, President Trump is an advocate for school choice, and his budget reportedly includes a significant increase in funding for vouchers and charter schools. What can we expect?
Well, there are two things to expect. Number one, he said during the campaign trail that parental choice was important to the nation. And so he's going to continue a tradition that we've seen with public charter schools, where there's been a lot of bipartisan support going back to 1994. For private school choice, it's going to be a little different. We were unable to get it in No Child Left Behind. We were unable to get it in Every Student Succeeds Act. So there's at least a push with both a president, a secretary, and a Congress leaning toward that. So it'll be a nice debate for a change, but a healthy one.
Well, critics charge the most vulnerable are going to be hurt because of cuts to after-school programs, adult literacy programs. What do you think is going to happen to people who depend on those programs?
Well, this is a negotiation process, and he's a first-term president working with Congress. There are a lot of members of Congress who want to not only protect those populations, but who also want more accountability in the program. And so you may see an exchange for, we'll give you money, but we also want to see more accountability. So that's just part of Capitol Hill bargaining. Number two, he won the election, and so he gets a chance to set the narrative on what we need to do. And so a cut in one program in no way means he doesn't like adults who are literate, because he believes that adults are important to the economy. It just means we have to prioritize how and where to spend. And even if there's a lack of federal money, doesn't in any way mean there's no local, state, or philanthropic money to play into this.
Well, speaking of prioritizing here, a lot of people are advocates for school choice, but the question is how to sort of sell school choice. Do you think the administration is selling school choice the wrong way or the right way?
Well, I think they should change the term from school choice to parental choice. That would be vitally important, because at the end of the day, we're trying to empower parents who are taxpayers, many of them, to say we would like to customize our child's education. So I'd say one, switch to parental choice. Number two, I would lead first with the investments we're going to make in traditional public schools. The majority of American students, right now 50 million, receive an education in the public school sector. For the foreseeable future, that's where the majority of our children are going to go to school. So what programs or investments do we have in this budget? Is it magnet schools? They've been around for a very long time, and they've got great success. Is it going to put more money into alternative programs focused on STEM? So there's some early wins he can have by promoting parental choice within the traditional system, and then moving to charters, and then moving to private schools.
Education is such an important issue, and important that they continue to debate and talk about the issue. Gerard Robinson, resident fellow in education policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks so much for talking with us about it.
Thank you for having me.
Finally tonight, Pope Francis plays the role of parish priest when he surprised a dozen families for an annual springtime blessing. The blessing is part of a post-Easter tradition in Italy. He rang doorbells in Ostia outside of Rome and blessed their homes. Priests post notices on buildings announcing the dates and times they'll pass by. However, instead of the local priest, the Holy Father showed up. And I'm sure it felt like a special blessing for all of those families. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Good night, and God bless.